And welcome, streamers, everybody dialing us up here on our Fox Local app. Here we are live in Studio B with a special guest here today. I first met Cliff Gibbons last summer when we were diving into Normandy and D-Day stuff. Cliff Gibbons has been in this community for a long time. If you don't know him, you know his dad. 17 consecutive terms in Congress, Sam Gibbons, of course. Cliff, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Now, we talked about this a while back, and I know you've got an incredible history, especially in Washington, D.C., and I was fascinated by the fact that we see with some of the pictures here, but you worked for President Carter for 3 years in the White House. You must have some incredible stories. That must have been such an interesting assignment for you.
It really was. It was just an out-of-body experience. I left the state attorney's office here in Tampa and the fifth floor of the annex, and went right straight from here to meet the Vice President of the United States in Chicago. Didn't even have a coat to wear, and we hit the road, and I never looked back. I mean, it was it was so fast paced that it was surreal in terms of. One of the hardest things to do is just try to get home and get your shirts cleaned and get your underwear washed and stuff like that. It was go, go, go. Nothing trains you for this. I mean, I had a great deal of experience of living in Washington, growing up in Washington. My mother had told my father on many occasions that, she had to take care of my two younger brothers, but she said, Sam, just take Cliff along to the meetings. And so I had a really fortunate experience as a youngster to be actually sitting in the Oval Office with the president. And that happened on numerous occasions with Johnson. And he didn't have any boys, and so he really we kind of connected. He was a lot of fun, and then so at least by the time I got there and I had a chance to spend some time with the president, and I was way off on the sidelines of this stuff, but he invited people to come in, and particularly on issues he wanted to be thoroughly briefed, and it's one of those things you never forget when you have your first one-on-one presidential briefing in the White House, and but he made it feel so comfortable that. It was a tough issue having to do with voluntary restraint agreements on automobiles. And I had about a 38-page memo on the subject. And he made it very clear from the very beginning of the briefing. Reuben Askew, the former governor of Florida, was in the USTR, and it was just the three of us there. And Reuben said to me, the governor said to me, he said, Cliff, you wrote it, you did it, you get up there and talk about it. Tell him all about what you learned about this and what the decision should be here at the end of the day. And so, I started going into, he didn't want to bail out the auto industry again. He said, I don't have it in the budget. I don't, every time we go bail them out, they go use the money for something else and they never come back and make a better car. And I'm just not going to do it. But tell me what you got your plan here, this VRA thing. I said, well, we're just going to put quotas on foreign cars and see if we can really prop the domestic auto industry up. Well, he said right off the bat, he said, no, let me see if I get this right. You want me to put quotas on cars so they can come in here and then wipe out the high end of our cars? I said, yes, sir, that's it. That was not mentioned anywhere in the memo. But he did mention something on page 26. It was a chicken wars, and it was a footnote.
Yeah.
And, he had read the footnote, and I'm like, wow. He really did his homework.
I know you had mentioned before that you obviously clearly valued your time with him. And you said just absolute piercing eye contact, gave you every second that ever had, and you thoroughly enjoyed working with him, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was gracious. He was tenacious. He was tough. But he had a smile that would just knock you on the floor. I mean, but his laser lock eyes on you. When you were talking to him, it was clear that he was the only guy and you were the only person in the room. And it was unnerving at first, because I've never been around someone that is so locked in. Now, Clinton had the same capabilities, but this was my first experience of just sitting there as close as we are to him, and him being completely locked in. And every time I met with him, you can see here in these pictures, it was the same way. I just had come in from Iowa here, and he wanted to know a little bit about what was going on out there. And he said, there's 4 people I want you to see. And this Marine back here said, come on, you got to keep moving on. Carter said, well, he's trying to do his job. But why don't you call the office tomorrow? I'm going to tell you who these 4 people are, and I want you to call them up and tell them that I said to call. And I'm coming out to see him as soon as I can, and I need to win Iowa, and again in 1980. So he had just this ability to move quickly, but he was just laser locked when you met with him.
Politics are tough, we know that, but he did have a reputation, earned or not, for being a little aloof at times, maybe by the press. But you saw a different president.
Well, he brought this on himself, and he ran against Washington. When he first started running for president in 1974, well, he actually started in 72, 73, but when he really got in earnest in Iowa, he went from 1% name recognition to President of the United States in a year. Nobody's ever done that before. I mean, he was tenacious. He was focused. He knew where he was going every day. And there was never a moment that he didn't put the pedal to the metal, and he let you know it. And so he was a master of the details, had an extraordinarily quick mind, gracious, incredible character. Came out in the funeral today. I don't have any tear ducts left after 3 hours of that funeral. It was something else.
Yeah.
I urge everybody to, if they have a chance to see that. It was a magnificent event in history.
I could tell that was hard for you watching today.
It was. When you're in the bubble and everything's moving so fast, you're not thinking about it. You're just doing what you're supposed to do, and pretty much staying out of the way. I wasn't any big shot around there at all like that. I just had a great place to see what was going on, and I wrote a book, and so I got to actually stay around for another 6 months after the transition to President Reagan, and really got to see the differences between administrations and what that's all about in the transitions. But I didn't know the jewel I had in front of me to work with, and I worked with both Vice President Mondale and the president when it was really trade policy that I was working on mostly. But he was he really did a lot in that area. He closed down the negotiations on the multilateral trade negotiations under the Tokyo Round, one of the biggest trade agreements that we ever had in the United States. And his opening up of China was just unbelievable. It was one of the meetings only meeting I had in the White House while my father was in Congress. My father had just returned from a Codel to China and spent almost a week in Beijing. And the meeting with Deng Xiaoping, the prime minister, was a slow start because my father always took the wives along in these meetings, and Deng didn't want anything to do with the women in the room, and he kept smoking his cigarettes until they left. And but they had a great time around Beijing doing a lot of antiquing. But the first question out of Deng's mouth was, how do we do business with the United States government? Well, Sam was shocked and said, you don't do business with the United States government. You do business with the businesses of the United States government. And Deng was just kind of shocked. He was not ready for that. He didn't really comprehend it. But I say that because when Father had the use of one of the Air Force One jets on all of his travels around the world because it's of the significance of what
Sure.
they were working on. And he just came in from Andrews Air Force Base that morning and came straight to the Oval Office where we had this briefing. And he told Carter this. He said, Mr. President, they think that they're going to do business with you. I said, no, it's not going to be you. It's going to be the CEO of GM and all the other companies in America. And it was an enormous breakthrough for Carter to understand it, because everything he gets is so filtered coming out of the State Department and everything like that. But it was that give and take in those kinds of circumstances that are so memorable to me, and looking back on the many years. It went so fast. It was like a blur, but it was exciting.
It sounds like it. We want to talk some more with Cliff Gibbons. Don't move. Some more stories from the White House. We also want to talk about D-Day and the Normandy Institute that you're a big part of for obvious reasons. When we come right back here on Unscripted, don't move. And welcome back to Fox 13 Unscripted on this special day as we and the nation lays President Carter to rest. We're here with Cliff Gibbons from Tampa and also D.C. You're kind of a part-timer in both places, or a full-timer in both places, I guess I would say.
I always call Tampa home.
I'm sure, for good reason. Cliff worked with President Carter for 3 years, worked in the White House. What do you think was something that people don't know about President Carter?
Well, he came in as an outsider and kind of shunned Washington and really didn't engage in the politics of Florida. He always said, the politics stop at the Oval Office front door. But he was extraordinarily successful. I mean, in the domestic area, he, had enormous deregulation of the airlines and the energy sectors. He had 10 incredibly successful legislative victories with huge majorities of bipartisan during his term. 10 pieces of legislation. He drafted them at the White House, too, and including the Superfund bill and everything else. Then on the deregulation side, and then the government reform, he and Askew really were in that period of time. He was so active with the legislative agenda, and he had some really great, talented people in the Office of Legislative Affairs that did it. But he was tenacious. I don't think that, in my lifetime or in the 20th century or this ever since, no president has passed this many pieces of legislation, significant pieces of legislation. He was tenacious. I don't know when he slept. I mean, he and Mondale alike used to always like to, connect with people, and they would go across the country and do 3 or 4 dinners a night, and then we'd deadhead back to Washington, and everybody was like delirious, including the press and everything like that. But he just, he was dogged with his passion for getting as many things done as he possibly could do.
And even after the White House, I mean, we saw it for how many years? Building houses, teaching Sunday school, still right up until just a few years ago, right? Yeah. I mean, this is a big part of him that, do you think we'll ever have another president who has that kind of a lasting impact outside of the White House?
Still thinking about the White House, his religious background drove everything he did. I didn't know that much about it, but it became much more clear that was his daily beacon. I think we all were shocked at the outcome of the election. I know that there was high inflation. It was just like it has been for us. We had the energy crisis because in the OPEC agreement, Nixon had agreed that if we had, with the concessions, that if we'd helped Israel, that they were going to put a full embargo on us. So he didn't really have much to. It wasn't something he caused. And then 444 days of hostages, and that's when I was doing a lot more traveling because Mondale took over the entire presidential schedule. Yeah. So and then I didn't really keep in touch with him. There was there have been reunions from time to time, and they always are a whole lot of fun to go back and see all the folks you work with.
And you told me Rosalynn was a big part of the team in the White House.
Oh,
huh?
Yeah, she was the first lady to have a formal office in the East Wing. And she actually sat in, I never sat in on it, but she sat in on cabinet meetings all the time, and was the real rock of stability, I think, in terms of, I'm sure there was pillow talk about, what did you think, Rosalynn? What do you think I should do here? And I think she was an incredible advisor. I mean, she had the same sort of good common sense, to see the big picture and help through where you got all this minutia going on, and she kind of really knew exactly where she was going, and very settling influence. She was just a consummate lady.
You've seen so much of the courage. We got to take one more break, but before I let you go, what's the most important thing people should know about President Carter that maybe we don't know?
His tenacious commitment to peace and telling the truth.
Yep, that's a great legacy. Fantastic legacy. Much more with Cliff Gibbons. We're going to talk about Normandy, talk about your dad landing behind enemy lines. Still one of the most amazing things I have ever heard. You got to hear this story from Cliff when we come right back. Don't move. And welcome back to Unscripted here with Cliff Gibbons here with us in studio. We appreciate you coming by. As you know, probably my career highlight personally was when I got to go to Normandy and help cover the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion last summer. And one of my favorite stories, we didn't get to quite tell it like we wanted to because you weren't there, but you had so much going on. But if you don't know, Cliff's dad, 17-term congressman and absolute local legend here, Sam Gibbons, was a paratrooper who was dropped behind enemy lines on June 6th. And he landed, 12:30 a.m. in a field in France that was completely occupied by the Germans. And I remember the story. I'm going to have you tell it to me again. But he reached down and he put his hand in something, and that's how he was able to stay alive, and he knew there were no Germans around. Tell me that story again.
I'll get to that, but I'll tell you what happened. He had rehearsed this for years, getting ready for the Normandy invasion.
Yeah.
And they had done a lot of night jumps, but it was pretty clear he was in charge of regimental command and had a lot more intelligence than most people did going into the invasion. But, as people ask him, were you scared? He says, well, I didn't have time to be scared because I've been drilling this thing in us for so long. We knew exactly what we're supposed to do. They came in about 800 feet from the west part of the Cotentin Peninsula going east, and then their job was to clear out the Germans from behind Utah Beach and secure the Douve River line to keep the German tanks and Panther divisions out of coming onto that peninsula until they could secure Cherbourg for a deep water port. But here's I think the most significant thing that happened in that next couple of minutes. When his parachute hit, and he said the only reason he lived was there was an anti-aircraft gun about maybe 100 yards from him, and all those Germans over there were just night blinded by all the tracers and the noise. And so, but as his canopy came down on him, he had a little prayer. He said, "Dear God, if you get me out of this alive, I promise that I'm going to devote my life to public service." And so after the Normandy invasion and Operation Market Garden, Bastogne, and then liberation of some of the worst concentration camps, he said, well, dear God, you got me through this. And so
now
my
it's
job
my
is
turn
to come back and...
Well, he sure did.
And did it. And so, so he got elected to the state legislature, and his first deal was, he said, a lot of people don't fight wars if they just get a little bit of education. So putting the emphasis on founding the University of South Florida was the first thing he did. And it all goes back to Normandy there.
Isn't that amazing?
And I'll take you to the field.
Yeah.
Where all of this happened. We have a little monument there.
Yeah, we know about that, normandyinstitute.org. We have a little bit of video of that as well. And that's an incredible place. It's a French chalet that at one time was actually used by the Germans.
It was their German headquarters.
And that was a picture.
War.
We got a picture of Rommel actually standing on the porch, right?
Correct. Yeah.
That's the building as it stands today. And this is the idea is to keep the story of Normandy and the invasion alive.
Well, it has
right?
three objectives here. It's an informational educational institute, a 501c3 U.S. corporation. But first of all, why did World War II happen? That's a tough question for even historians to answer, but there are some reasons, and we're going to be cataloging all of that there with some very bright global historians. 2, what happened at Normandy? We've got Band of Brothers and a lot of films and a lot of fiction has come into it and a lot of stories have come into it. But, from a historical point, what actually happened in the build-up to it and what happened on that day and how we ended up winning that war in the Normandy theater there. And then the most important thing is what we did as a country following World War II to bring together the UN, the OECD in Paris, the World Trade Organization in Geneva, the World Bank, the IMF, all of these institutions that has now brought 80 years of peace.
This never happened before.
Never in the history of Europe have they gone 80 years without a war.
I got 20 seconds. Your dad put his hand in what to let him know that there were cows in the field and were Germans there?
To make sure that, he to find out if the field was mined.
Right.
And so he would go from cow pie to cow pie that was fresh. And he said, I'm safe as long as that's warm.
He did. So, Cliff, I could talk to you all night. I appreciate you coming by. We're going to get this online. Come back, will you?
We got lots more to talk about. We'll once you get you over to the Normandy Institute, and we'll get there. And
I will. And in the meantime, check that out, normandyinstitute.org, so people can learn more about it because the education must continue. Thanks again for coming by.
You're great. Thank you so much.
See you on the news. Thank you.
You're great.